Welcome to the Protein MB podcast. I'm Jordan Sathiwa, and today we've got a fun conversation coming up with Dr. Erin Goldberg. We brought a researcher on today, and the discussion we're going to have is going to be as much about research as it is finding your passion and getting into a career path. So let's just jump right into it. Dr. Erin Goldberg, tell us about yourself. And I'm gonna nitpick on things that I want to hear more about, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so my name's Erin Goldberg. I've been in sort of the research world for a number of years now. Most recently, my position is as research associate with Jim House. So I mainly support him as his role in the Manitoba Strategic Research Chair in Sustainable Protein. I know it's a mouthful to say. So there's lots of key activities that we do. We have a protein research symposium that we hold annually. So we're going into our fourth year, which is pretty exciting. So stay tuned for more details on that.
I love the fact that you just kind of just threw it out there lightly. This is actually, I want to focus in on this because this is a huge accomplishment for Manitoba. And as much as it is for Dr. House, it's also for the whole team around this. So let's jump into this a little bit more on what exactly that research chair coming to the province of Manitoba in protein means for the province and research.
Yeah, no, that's huge. So this is a chair program that's basically funded through the province of Manitoba, through Manitoba Ag, also the University of Manitoba. But there's a lot of additional support for students and researchers through the NSERC Create Capture training program. And there's lots of industry and government funding programs as well.
Yeah, and this is something where the research now, the amount and quality of research that can start coming out of Manitoba. And so I'm gonna let you know a little secret about our podcast is we love to pump the tires of Manitoba. It is critical to us that people know just how excellent not just the U of M, and I think that's also something to really dig into on this is that this research chair position goes beyond the borders of the U of M, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
It does, yeah. Of course, in the name, it's Manitoba Sustainable Protein Research Chair. However, it's really expanding across Manitoba and also across the nation. So looking at what's going on in Canada, but obviously here in the prairie provinces, we have a huge understated capacity in this area. So that's what we're really focused on, just driving that piece in Manitoba. Everybody knows that we're leaders in sustainable protein, but really like shouting that out loud and proud to the rest of the world, I think is important.
I love that. So before we get too far into this, I want to know a little bit more about you because one of the things that intrigued me about getting you on the show here is who you are, your background, because I really do think getting the next generation of researchers is always the priority of the researchers that are if they're doing the work now. And how did you get started, and when did it kind of resonate with you that research was going to be the thing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It probably starts back in childhood. Honestly, I was 5 years old when I was diagnosed with cancer. And so from that experience, I think growing up and entering my kind of years in university, I was always interested in preventative medicine, in health, in nutrition. And obviously the cancer that I faced was not linked to dietary habits or, lifestyle choices, because clearly I was only 5 years old, right? So how much life experience did I have? So I wasn't a smoker. I wasn't, eating a poor diet necessarily. But I think that really set the stage for me in being so interested in that. So when I was going through university, I was kind of waffling between, I always loved science, but I was sort of thinking about maybe biopsychology. And then when I found the nutrition program at the University of Manitoba, that was really what did it for me. I loved everything about it. I loved that preventative side. Also linking sort of into other areas of research. So, there's exercise science and kinesiology. There's the medicine and pharmaceuticals. It's not just nutrition, right? It really expands outward. And there's food science. So I think it's such a multidisciplinary program that it is so interesting in so many ways.
Well, let's also, because childhood, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's one of those things where it is wonderful to see someone's heart come out in these interviews. What were you like in high school? Because this is always my, like, who were you in high school that you sat there one day and said, like, yeah, I'm going to go through like a decade of education after this, and just I'm going to plug away until somebody calls me doctor and I can do research, because that's a big bold thing to jump on, even with that that heartfelt backing to it. So how did that kind of play out in high
Oh
school?
gosh, yeah, I guess it's just an evolution. It's not something that I went into knowing that I had a decade, road ahead of me. Obviously, it sort of starts with being interested in science in high school, especially biology and chemistry. Moving that into my undergraduate studies and really trying to figure out what I really wanted to do, where my place was in this world, what I wanted to do as a career path. And it wasn't always clear cut. I had friends going into medicine and law, and I just didn't feel like I wanted to fit into one of those boxes. And so that's sort of where I think a lot of the people in my life and who I was surrounded by and the mentors, in particular, Jim House and also Michelle Aliani, two key people in my life that I think really guided that career path for me. And I loved working with them. So I think the key thing is surrounding yourself with the right people, the right mentors who can help support that. And I just loved, because I loved working with them so much, that journey just continued through my master's program and then evolving into a PhD program with Jim.
And I think that's something that you've hit on the head there, is when you get that passion for what you want to do, creating that circle. So what's that like doing in an academic setting? How did you even go about starting finding mentors, or is it something that is just handed to you and you got lucky?
So I started with a different advisor, and I was doing work sort of like in canola research, and it wasn't that interesting to me, to be honest. And when I heard about a program that Jim House was leading, I love animals. That's sort of my secondary passion. And so he was doing a lot of egg trials with laying hens. So I was able to sort of transition my research from canola into eggs. And I always had a passion for sensory research as well. I love sensory evaluation, kind of determining the aroma, flavor, and texture of different food products. So I've always loved that. And Michelle Aliani was one of my professors in a course that I took. So I absolutely was in love with his passion on that subject. So I wanted to sort of bridge both of those things. And that's how I had both of them as my co-advisors on the project that I inevitably started my master's with, which is basically feeding chickens different diets, but different inclusion levels of hemp seed and hemp seed oil to increase the amount of omega-3 fatty acids in the eggs, so to make them healthier. But then we also wanted to balance that with the sensory profile, making sure that the eggs didn't taste bad or smell bad in the end. So we accomplished that goal, and we proved that, the maximum inclusion levels were able to increase nutrition, but also maintain sensory profile. So I know that's going down sort of a long path there, but that's sort of how that first project started. And then from there, it creates new research questions. And then that leads us into the second trial, the third trial, and then inevitably graduating from my PhD and then starting a postdoctoral fellowship.
So you just hit on something I really want to discuss, because this is, I think, my favorite part of doing this podcast is when I get to talk to researchers. And the one commonality I've been finding is you all are very passionate about finding answers, and then more so finding the next question. So let's talk about that, because I'm not sure that and I'm going to talk about myself here as a layperson. I don't think general public really grasps the brain of a researcher. You're always looking to prove yourself wrong, it seems like, or to take something you found and like it wasn't enough the next level. So kind of let's talk about passions there, and especially since I'm hoping that somebody's going to see this and be like, I want to be a researcher too. So if you've got, I want to get a taste for your brain and how it works. So if we can go that direction, I'd love to know how you think.
Oh gosh. Well, I think as a researcher, you have to be inquisitive and then always thinking of, what's next, not just because you have to be on looking out for funding opportunities, obviously, but that's a really difficult thing, actually. So at the very end of, when you're analyzing your data and coming up with those next research questions is one of the most challenging things, probably.
Yeah. And let's continue there, because it is funding. And I'm not sure how much you're going to want to chat about this, but I think there's a very large misconception in the general public that funding means the researcher is going to be biased. But what I'm seeing from research, yeah, I love that.
No, I mean,
is researchers are, and I think everyone involved is like, we need the correct answer, because it's either going to save harm down the road if it's a safety thing, or if it. But I'm going to let you discuss this, because the funding and how a team navigates that. Let's kind of pop in on that.
well, I mean, I was just at a conference in the Netherlands, and before each presenter went on stage, they had to kind of declare their, conflicts of interest, which I think is so important, just to know if, where people are getting their funding from. Perhaps is there a research question that, they're trying to answer for that particular company, if they're funded by a company, so to speak. But I think for the most part, as a researcher, you're going into this work because you are just inquisitive. And
I think that's the critical part, is it's researchers go into this to find answers, and then the next question, and continue kind of that process. So with that kind of said, what if you could go back to high school you, or junior high school you, what would you have loved to have known, and I guess geared up for, to make this journey easier? I don't know if it could be easier. It's a lot of schooling, but what
yeah,
would you tell yourself?
yeah, you sort of just take things as they come, I would say. Roll with the punches. I think one thing I learned from just going through the process and after all of these years is that science is always evolving. So what we think we know now, or what we have an understanding of now today, might be completely different in 10 years and 20 years and 50 years. And a really good example of that is probably the link between dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol, because I was our understanding for decades that if you're eating shrimp and eggs and a lot of high saturated fat foods that contain a lot of cholesterol, people associated that because there have been many studies that showed that. But since then, it's sort of been kind of debunked, and we understand that it's trans fat in the diet, it's saturated fat, it's not dietary cholesterol. Of course, there is a small percentage of the population that are cholesterol responders, but for the most part, we can eat a healthy diet without limiting that type of nutrient. And so I think just having, as a researcher, having a flexible mind and being open to really anything is the most critical thing. Because if you're closed-minded, if you've heard something, it's been driven into you for 10 years, 20 years, I definitely experienced that going through nutrition. We always were taught a calorie is a calorie is a calorie, but there are so many other things involved in energy expenditure. So yeah.
No, and I think that this is one of the things that I know I struggle with, where you're like, wait a second, I heard, and then I realized, like, oh, I'm 42 years old, right? Like, the thing I heard was an ism from my dad when I was playing hockey. Who knows where he heard it? But like it's things like bro science in the gym, right? Like things like that where you're like somebody grabs a tidbit, or it was something that we believed until, like you say,
Mm-hmm.
the evolution of science. So let's talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit, because I think that that's something the general public needs to also understand
Mm-hmm.
is you'll have scientists. It looks like they're contradicting themselves or even each other, but it's just the evolution of a correct answer, I guess, for lack of a better
Yeah,
word.
I mean, and there's levels of evidence, right? We can look at the lower levels, if you're doing animal research, or if you're going up to observational studies, or if you're going up to the top looking at randomized controlled trials. That's the gold standard in not just nutrition research, but all research, right? So there's lots of variables that need to be controlled in every study. So it's challenging, but everybody's doing the best they can with what they have and the
Yeah.
the work that they're doing.
So we've covered getting the next generation into this, and we've covered kind of who you are. Now, what I want to do, and this is something that always excites me talking to researchers. Where are we going? So right now, Manitoba, you get to, yeah, I mean, you get a prime seat with the research chair associate gig. What is Manitoba? Where are we focused, especially in this protein sector? What's on the horizon for us?
A lot of work being done in fermentation. There's talk about lab grown meat, but Jim House was just talking on CJOB about how we're still a long ways away from that. Because of the expense involved. So it's not extremely viable, but there are a few companies out there that are looking to mass produce that. But again, just going back to that concept of sustainability from those four dimensions: health, environment, economic, sociocultural, that is key to continuing to drive the sustainable protein sector in Manitoba and Canada. So I think if the focus is placed on all of those dimensions simultaneously, that's just going to maintain us as a leader in protein in this sector.
Now, interesting enough, you've talked to sustainability. Is this is the focus right now? Correct? Is
Yeah, that's the driving force. So, Jim always says that he's agnostic towards proteins, meaning whether it's plant-based or animal-based, we work with all proteins. There is a place at the dinner table, so to speak, for all proteins. And that's where, protein quality can come into play.
and what are some of the next projects on the horizon that we're looking at that are getting funded? Is that something you're involved with, or know that's coming our way?
Well, if you look at, we are going to be launching our website very soon, probably in the next couple of weeks. So that's really exciting. I don't know, can I mention it here?
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's mbproteinchair.ca. On this website, there's going to be a lot of information about not only Jim House as the chair, but also his, research program, the research themes that are, really focused on, he's got three primary areas. So he's got one that understands the factors regulating sulfur amino acid metabolism. He's got a second program continuing that egg research, looking at sustainable production systems, novel value-added egg products. And then his third research focus is determining the factors influencing quality of dietary proteins. So that can be, genetic, environmental. There's obviously interactions between the two as well. And then on the website, too, there's going to be information about our asset map, which can be found at cafamap.ca. That I really want people to kind of go to because this is sort of like a very broad network of expertise and infrastructure in this area. And we actually developed it in partnership with Emily, the Enterprise Machine Intelligence and Learning Initiative. So they were sort of instrumental in helping us develop that map. And And then the website is also, there's going to be information about our upcoming symposium coming up in June of this year, seminars, workshops that are coming up. And then there's a whole listing of Jim's publications, and not only just listing the titles, but also explaining what their impact of that was.
Gotcha.
So all of that information is going to be there, which is very exciting.
I had the privilege of being at the symposium. Well, actually, I think that's when we first shook hands ever in life. So, and I was blown away. I did not realize the volume of research. And I don't know if you've got numbers that you can just spit off the top of your head, but I must have seen 100 different researchers there. The amount of, there was that, it looked like a science fair to me, right? Like when I was walking down those aisles of all the latest things that are going on, and everything from sustainably producing food to ensure food security to, like you were saying earlier, fermentation and different things to do with digestion and, how much does a carbohydrate play in the absorption of a protein. I was astounded that these questions are being thought of, and then someone is able to then create an experiment. So let's, I'm going to back it up right there. How does that work? If I come up with a question, how does the experimentation process come from that?
So yes, it all starts with a hypothesis, right? So you either have to prove or disprove the hypothesis. So you generate that research question. So this is basically just describing the scientific method. And so you have to come up with appropriate tests that will measure, whether it's a bioactive in the body, in the blood, or like a tissue, and then have an appropriate measurement for that particular test. And then it either proves or disproves the hypothesis, and around we go.
And that's, this is the thing, because I love that, you're speaking to a layperson, but this is, again, a few of the researchers have been on here before, and I think I ask this every time, and it's still, maybe it's just not sinking in, maybe it is, I don't know. But the scientific method is the bedrock for where Manitoba is as a researcher, and where the MB protein chair. This is what we do. We come up with the question, and then we prove, disprove, just like you described. That would be the summation of the whole thing.
In very simplistic terms.
Yeah.
But yeah, actually, to go back to what you were saying about, what's next, and I mentioned fermentation, but I should also really mention, food processing is also huge in the province. We have a lot of researchers doing, extrusion, for instance, lots of different unique processes that are going to be up and coming that are highly sustainable. So, not just looking at whole foods, but how can we manipulate or utilize them or process them in ways that they can, be easily stored, last longer, better for us. That's what we're all about, right?
This will be the last thing I want to harp on then, because I don't know that I realized until literally just putting it together in my brain right now, but researchers, so a part of the processing of food creation and the extrusion process, because I saw this done, you're talking about it, like what I saw at the end of it was a fava bean product that looked like a
puff,
for lack of a better word, a cheesy puff. But so this would be your, if you go into food research, if you go into the career path you took, at some point in your life, you could be creating new ways to create food, to make it more sustainable, to make it last long. This is part of that research model.
Yeah, so I went into nutritional sciences, but, we're also obviously very closely related to food science. And there's a lot of talk about avoiding highly processed foods because, of course, that's going to negatively impact our health. But at the same time, we want to create options for people. So people are on the go, they're running to work, they're going to school, they're on the bus, they're not necessarily able to sit down or stand in the kitchen for hours and make home cooked meals every day. So I think food processing is always going to be a mainstay for us. We're again trying to make healthier food. You can obviously have highly processed foods that are still higher in protein, lower in sugar. There are ways to sort of manage that, but of course, if we're looking at the healthiest diet possible, the most aspirational diet, we have to really go back to square one, looking at Canada's food guide, what they recommend, whole foods first, but then again, to round out, because people don't live such static lives, right? It's not just so cut and dry. Like we can't always eat like that 100% of the time. So creating convenience options for people is so critical.
I love it. And I hate the fact that we're going to have to leave it here for this one. Dr. Erin Goldberg, it is a pleasure to hear from you. And those websites you threw up there, cafamap.ca and
Yes.
mbproteinshare.ca,
.ca.
those are going to be in every link that we put out there, because I agree with you. Everyone needs to know what's going on, how to track it. And general public, I think that this is the most important thing that people can do, is be engaged with the research that's going on in our province, knowing where we're going, knowing where we're headed, and the excellence of the entire province, all of the different universities, everyone. Like, there is so much going on. It is wonderful to see as it comes under one roof, and gets led by some strong leaders like yourself, that we've got something very good to be proud of in the research field here in Manitoba. So thank you so much for being here with us and sharing. And I promise you, we're going to be talking again soon.
Thanks so much, Jordan. Thanks for having me.